Come here and I'll tell you an old story. A long time ago, in the village of Brushna in County Kerry, lived a man by the name of Brian MacDonald. Brian was a master basket maker, and he was in big demand. As you can imagine, back in them days, there was no plastic to carry your groceries around, so baskets were the chosen method. Brian had one problem. As soon as the baskets were made, and sold, Brian had the money drank. He was a fierce drinker. This, as you can imagine, created problems with the wife, as it was hard to feed a wife and kids on the smell of the beer farts of a drunken man. Along came the day when Brian had every sally rod within 15 miles of Brusna cut, and he took to the bed. He had had enough, he didn't want any more of it. Brian MacDonald, get up out of that bed, the wife said. Get out and earn a living for these children and myself. We need to eat. Will you leave me alone, woman, he said. I'm happy enough where I am. So what would I want to be going out cutting rods? There's nothing there for 15 miles. The wife wasn't happy at all. She threatened to bring her brothers down to him. This had enough to have an effect on Brian. He was wary of the brothers, for many moons ago the brothers had paid him a visit. We won't go into it now, but Brian was scared enough to recognise when he ought to do what he was told. Woman, what am I supposed to do, he says. Sure, there's nothing here for 15 miles. There's no rods to be cut. Go up to Pool of Horse, she said, and there's plenty of rods up there. Now, Pool of Horse was a mystical place, known for as a hideout for the little people and many other creatures. Jesus, said Brian, what am I going to do? He weighed up his options between the little people and the big brothers. Now, let me remind you, the big brothers were hulks of men. They had knuckles dragging along the ground, they were so big. So after weighing it up, Brian thought to himself, sure, I'll take my chances with little people. Off he set the next morning with his lunch in his back pocket and his tools and implements in his bag, and off he strolled for 15 miles until he came to the little valley of Poolahurst. Now, Poolahurst was a valley with a little stream running through it and a rocky old place, but what it did have was plenty of sally rods for weaving the baskets. So Brian says, sure, I'll chance me arm with him. On he headed in and made his way over to the sally rods. He cut the first one. Nervous he was. Sure, everything seems okay, he said. He cut a second and a third and a fourth, and everything was fine. Sure. He had a pile of sally rods within a few minutes, and he thought to himself, haven't I the bigger fool for not coming here sooner than this? He had the first pile tied up when he thought, I'll get started on the second. He started on the second and he cut 1 and 2, but within a minute he noticed that there was little wisps of smoke coming up around his ankles. What's going on here, he thought. Before he knew it, the little wisps of smoke were coming out of every sally rod he had cut. They were up to his ankles, up to his knees, up to his stomach, up to his chest, and before he knew it, he was covered in smoke and he couldn't see in front of him. It was like he was sitting in a barrel of milk, pure white in front of him. What am I going to do, Brian thought to himself. Sure, if I try to make my way over them rocks, I'll break my neck. He thought, sure, I'll sit down and have my lunch. So he did. He sat down and he had his lunch, and when he was finished his lunch, it had gotten worse. He couldn't see his hands in front of him. Oh God, what am I going to do now, he said. So he sat there and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and the smoke didn't clear. But eventually, after a while, he spotted lights in the distance. He said, if there's lights over there, there's human beings over there. I'll try and make my way over there and I should be safe. So he did. He felt his way through, rock by rock, and he eventually made it to this lovely thatched cottage, whitewashed walls, and 3 big windows with the light glaring out of them, and a half door. Brian walked over and he popped his head in, and in there he seen an old couple sitting by the fireplace, with the man smoking away on his pipe and the woman knitting her jumper. Brian MacDonald, is it yourself? Come in there and have a word with us. Brian didn't know the couple, but he thought, sure, I won't refuse their hospitality. And in he went. He sat down and they chatted about the normal things that people chat about, the weather, the price of turf and all such things. After a few minutes, the man said to Brian, sure, Brian, tell us an old story there. Tell us a good story, a fairy story, one that'll amuse us. Brian says, I don't know any stories. I'm no good at that sort of thing. When my father and my grandfather used to tell them stories, I used to be out drinking. He used to be, but he wasn't going to tell them that. Ah, the man said, "Sure, what use are you if you can't tell us a story?" And him and the wife turned their back on Brian in disgust. After a few minutes, the old woman turned around to Brian and says, "Brian, make yourself useful. Go down to that old well across the road and get us some water, would you?" So Brian, happy to oblige for their hospitality, went down and found the well across the road. He found the bucket, he dipped it into the well, and he pulled out a bucket full of water. But the water was spilling over the sides of the bucket, so he thought, "I'll rest this bucket here. I don't want to get water on me legs as I'm walking up the road." No sooner had he got the bucket down on the side of the well when he was hit by a gust of wind. He was tuck left, he was tuck right, he was tuck up in the air, and he landed with a bump on his head. When he came to, he didn't know where he was. There was no bucket and there was no well, and it was clouded with white smoke again. "Oh God," he said, "what's that happening?" But he saw the lights of the cottage just up beyond, so he says, "I'll make my way back up." Brian strolled up to the cottage and popped his head in over the half door, but there was no man and woman sitting by the fireplace this time. All along the wall were big, blocky, sullen men dressed in black with sad faces on them. "Oh God, what's going on here?" He looked to the other wall. More big, burly, sudden men with black, wearing black and looking sad. He looked over to the left, up towards the bedroom. He seen 10 toes poking out from underneath the blanket. "Oh God," he thought, "I'm after landing myself on a funeral wake. What am I going to do?" Before he could turn around, a woman with jet black hair sitting beside the fireplace said, "Brian MacDonald, come in here to me in my hour of mourning and talk to me." Oh, not one to refuse a woman. Brian went in to speak to the woman. The woman started asking him questions. "Oh, Brian, tell us a story there, tell us about yourself." But like all Irish men back in them days, Brian was a shy man and there wasn't a word out of him. After about 2 minutes, one of the big burly men stood up and says, "This is the worst funeral wake I've ever been at in my life. I'm off to get myself a fiddler from the town and we'll liven this wake up." Just as he was on his way out the door, the woman with the black hair called after him, "Now, what would you want to be going down the town to find yourself a fiddler when we've the finest fiddler in all of Brosna here tonight, Brian MacDonald?" "What, woman? What are you talking about? I've never played the fiddle in my life. I don't know a tune." But before he could say any more, Brian had the fiddle in his hand and the bow in his hand, and he was playing the finest music that the people had ever seen. They get up and they danced around the room and they jigged and they reeled. And after a few minutes, they were so tired with the sweat dripping off them, they fell back into their chairs. "Oh, Brian, that was the most beautiful music we've ever heard in our life. Whoever taught you well." Brian hadn't got a clue what to say. He didn't know what was going on. He just sat there and accepted what was happening. After another few minutes, another burly man stood up and said, "Oh, I think it's about time we got this coffin blessed and got moving with this old funeral here. I'm off to get the priest," he says. As he was on his way out the door, the woman with the black hair said again, "Sure, what would you want to be going down to get the priest for when we've the finest priest in all of Munster here with us tonight, Brian MacDonald from Brosna?" "What are you talking about, woman? I'm no priest. I've never said a prayer in my life. I wouldn't know what to do." Before he could say any more, Brian, they had the vestments on him and they had a collar around his neck, and Brian was up giving them the most beautiful sermon that anybody had ever heard in all their life. The words flowed and they bowed to their knees and they listened to his beautiful sermon. Once he was finished, they all flocked to Brian and said, "Brian, that was the most beautiful sermon we've ever heard. Oh, if you're ever stuck for a parish to come to, if the bishop won't let you go there, come to see us, we'll petition the bishop for you." Oh, again, Brian just sat down, he didn't know what was going on. Next, another burly man says, "Right, it's time to get this coffin moved. We need to move to the graveyard." So 3 men stood up and shoved it up onto their shoulders. The 4th man, unfortunately, was a big man. He was 6'5". They thought, "Oh, this is not going to work. If we put that man under the coffin will end up falling, we all skewered and we'll have awful trouble." So the big burly man said, "Right, I'll go down to town and I'll get myself a surgeon and we'll saw down this man's legs and we'll cut him down to size and he'll be perfect for this coffin. He was on his way out the door when the lady with the black hair called after him again. Sure, what would you want to be going down to town to get a surgeon for? We have the finest surgeon in all of Ireland here with us tonight, Brian MacDonald from Brusna. My God, woman, what are you talking about? I've never... I don't know what you're talking about. I'm no surgeon. Before he could say any more, Brian, they had the hacksaw in his hand. They had the doctor's garments on him and the mask over his face. And Brian had the man's leg up on the chair and he was hacking away. Off with the leg. He looked around and said, "Where's that dog?" The dog was sitting in the corner. He threw the bone to the dog. He took the foot of the man, knocked it back onto the leg and fitted him. It was a perfect fit. Although the problem was now the man had one big leg and one small leg. So Brian pushed the other leg up onto the chair, sawed him down to size, knocked the foot back on, and he was brand new. He stood up, perfect size, coffin up onto the shoulders. Everything was brand new. So off they set. They decided to walk down towards the graveyard. It took them 10 minutes to get there. When they got there, Brian noticed something strange. The graveyard wall was 12 foot high. Oh my God, he said, this is strange. He thought, I'll say nothing. So as they walked around the graveyard looking for the gate, they got one time around and Brian realised, my God, there's no gate for this graveyard. He decided to say nothing and he left it as it was and he kept on walking around. They went around the second time and the third time. By the third time they got around, Brian nudged the guy beside him and says, "Hey, what's going on here? There's no gate to this graveyard." "Ah, don't worry, Brian, we'll sort it out. We'll take him up over the wall." So how are they going to get over this wall? So the first fella put the second fella up on top of his shoulders and put the third fella up, and one by one they climbed up to the top of the wall, pulling each other up and pulling each other up until the last person left there was Brian with the coffin. "Give us that old coffin up there, Brian. Give it a old hoosh up there." So he did. Brian hooshed the coffin up. He pushed it up and they grabbed it and they pulled it up to the top of the table, the wall. So Brian, give us your old hand there and we'll pull you up. And they did. They pulled Brian's hand up. So next they had to get back down off the wall again. And they followed the same pattern. One went down, the other came down after them, and so forth, until the last man up there was Brian and the coffin. Brian hooshes down that old coffin there, and Brian was about to hoosh down the coffin when a sheegeen gust of fairy wind took him left and took him right and took him up in the air again, and he landed with a bump on his head again. My Jesus, where am I? He was back beside the well, and he was back beside the bucket. Oh, Brian didn't know what was going on. He picked up the bucket. He didn't worry about it dripping on his legs this time, and he ran back up to the house. When he popped his head inside the door, there was the old man and the old woman sitting by the fireplace. "Ah, Brian, you got that old water, fair play to you. Come in and tell us what happened to you, what happened to you." "Oh, my Jesus," he said. "Oh, I've a story to tell you. My God, what's just that they're happening to me?" So he proceeded to tell them the story of what had just happened. After he finished, the man said to him, "Sure, Brian, isn't that wonderful? You now have a story to tell people when they ask you, and with a story like that they couldn't help but welcome you into their home." It was getting late in the evening, so the old couple said to Brian, "Brian, you take the bed down here and we'll take the bed upstairs and we'll see you for breakfast in the morning." Brian was exhausted, so he decided this was a good idea. Into bed he went and straight to sleep. He woke up with a chill on his toes in the middle of the night. But when he woke up and looked around him, he wasn't in the bed. There was no house over him, and he was lying in a field in Poolahurst with his head resting on his sally rods. "My Jesus, what's going on?" he said. He got out of there quick smart. He ran all the way home, and he hopped into the bed, and he didn't get back out of it for 3 weeks, and there was no threats of big brothers or guards or priests could get him back out of it. The wife she couldn't get over it. She couldn't get him out of the bed. He said to her, "I'll never go back and cut another sally rod again, for what I seen down there was from the other world." And, true to his word, Brian never cut another sally rod in his life, and he never wove another basket.